All right, everybody, welcome to the Dev Talk Show here on a Thursday morning, just before your morning stand-up, and it's 7:40 a.m. on July 6th, 2023. So we are a couple days post celebrating U.S. Independence Day.
Yeah.
Hopefully you had a great weekend, Rich. It was a 4-day weekend for me. I was very fortunate that my employer gave us that Sandwich Monday off.
Oh, that's
In
awesome.
between. Yeah, that was nice. I know so that happens a lot. That happens every year here with the American Thanksgiving being on Thursday. That some employers give that Sandwich Friday off, and others say like, "Well, that's what PTO is for." So
Yeah, use it as you wish.
right. So
But yeah, no, it was good. I actually took a couple of additional days. So from took the Friday all the way into yesterday. So this is my first day back at work, which is why we haven't done a show in
yeah,
over a week. But that's fine.
right.
That's what vacations are for.
Yep, that's right. So hopefully everybody, if you're joining us live or if you're watching the replay on YouTube, thanks for joining us. And today, as you can see in the title, we talked a couple shows about this topic, the Azure Developer CLI, and how among its different features, one of them is it has some built-in templates where you can get a new project started from the templates that besides just giving you code, which is I think what we're all used to, also gives you deployment as code, so that you can go straight to the cloud with the project. And if your project is maybe both web and API, we looked at one particular example where 2 separate web apps, off they go. Yep. And that was pretty cool. And then the other capability that we were talking about was that you can create your own templates. And so that's why we're here. We're going to see if we can make File New Project work for you live while we create an Azure Developer CLI template. I hope that's the correct terminology for that.
Yeah. No, I think I spot on.
Awesome.
I guess the only thing I would say Azure Developer CLI, right? Because that's
is that what I said? Did I not say Azure Developer CLI? I might not have.
I heard Azure CLI.
Yeah,
but that
I believe
might have been just me. But
it's AZ versus AZ CLI, which I've covered extensively on my own and we've talked about on this show because I love that thing.
Yeah.
And then this is AZD, which we did cover on the Dev Talk Show when it was in preview, pretty early days.
Yeah.
And now it is generally available and has features that I think we didn't talk about back then. So
yeah, definitely. And we did a show a week ago. That was the Monday, Tuesday we did together, right? So just over a week ago. You can go back and look at that one and see kind of walking through the capabilities of Azure Developer CLI and kind of how we got started in putting together what we're going to continue here, which is there's the and I probably should share my screen so you can see.
I'll just go ahead and, as you can see, live, professionally produced. Everybody's screen is ready to go. Like that's why we have a producer. Oh, wait a second. No, we don't.
That's you.
Yeah, right. That's just somebody clicking buttons.
It's funny, we not necessarily rehearse, but we've got a little bit, I put some notes together, some things we definitely want to kind of cover and talk about. And, even with all of that, we're doing this on the fly, which I think is the important part. So if you think about it, you as the developer at home, if you wanted to go ahead and do this, what would you, hopefully we uncover the same things you'll run into and help get rid of those blockers that you might run into as well. So,
right.
What we did was we created, and here's our application. I'm just going to do a look at the file structure. So what we did was we created in Visual Studio a project. It's just a Blazor empty project, nothing more than the standard. I've got the counter page and I've got the fetch API or fetch data page, just the basic template for right now. And Chris and I have talked about other ways that we might do certain capabilities or certain other ways of building Blazor applications, maybe we throw a database on there as a template, or maybe we host it in different locations, which would give you different Azure Developer CLI components when you bring down that template. But we're going to keep this one simple. We got a Blazor application, which is inside of our source
So let's
directory.
if you can do
Yeah,
a
go ahead.
couple things, if you can maybe make the terminal full screen and or the fonts a lot bigger.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm watching on us. I have a second monitor here that's much smaller. That might be your laptop at work if you're watching us at work. And I
Yep.
look over and say, like, can I read that? And it's like, maybe a little.
Not
Yeah,
really.
okay.
How's that? Is that better?
It's better. It's better.
Cool. All right.
All right, cool.
So I'm inside that source directory. The source directory you see there, it's just a Blazor application. If we wanted to, we could reopen it in Studio, run it, debug it, what have you. We're not going to do that here. We're just going to focus on, because what we want to do is start to build out a template for this. So if we say that this is our code and we put it in the source folder, because by convention, that's where your code belongs. And we look at the rest of the structure around this, and we talk through this a little bit. I don't have... There we go. We talked about this a little bit before when we looked at this. Wow, that was odd. Cool. All right, we've got essentially a folder here that is our Azure DevOps, and we have a similar one here in GitHub. Those are basically for doing the CI/CD pipelines. They are optional. We'll definitely, as going through creating this template, hopefully we'll create both. We'll definitely create at least one of them. There is an Azure component here, and that essentially defines the environments. And we walk through this last time. This is just really quickly going through what's inside of the AZD project when we stand it up. There is dev container capability, so that ability to go ahead and run your code inside of a container, even though you may not have certain things like Python components running on it. That's what your application runs, because you can run it inside of a container and isolate those frameworks or whatever it is you might need to run your application. And then finally, which is probably where we're going to spend a good bit of time today, is focusing on the infrastructure folder. That's where our bicep and infrastructure as code components are going to reside. And I think that's where we're going to start building out the template component. So we want to define what we need to build in Azure. And in talking through taking our web application and moving it into Azure, we think we need 2, if not 3 things in there. Anytime you build a web application, typically have some kind of an app service. In order to run an app service, you need an app service plan. So essentially the compute power that runs on top of. And because we're building Blazor, and this is something, Chris, that would love to get your input on and thoughts, but it looks like from my interpretation and reading the documentation is that we really should have an Azure Signal R stood up as well, so that we can take advantage of the Signal R component that gets created for a Blazor application. And that is right now, I think it's a discussion to have, but it seems like those are the 3 main things right now to get this template in place that are what we would need.
Yeah, it would be so the file new project, so to speak, for your typical Blazor app in the templates. I don't know how to describe this. I hope I'm not using the wrong terminology. The web app self-hosts Blazor. The web app self-hosts Signal R. So basically, Signal R is still going to work fine. Even if you just took that and deployed it straight to Azure Web Apps, it's fine. It's just that, and this isn't a bad thing. It's that Signal R is being hosted in the same web app, the same machine. But to your point, what might not be obvious to people is, okay, so I love this idea. I love having this template, but I want to disconnect that portion. I don't, that'll be interesting to dig into to see, could you disconnect that and host that part on Azure Signal R? I simply actually don't know. That'll be fun. So this project structure you're showing us to start off with,
yeah.
and I'm just going to ask the question. You can tell us how you did it. Is this something that you generated, that you handmade, or is this generated?
This is generated. So
Okay.
if you go to, let me get back focus in here, and I just go inside of here. Let's do folder tests AZD, and I say, hey, inside of this folder, I'm going to go ahead and run the init command, which is all we, if you go back to the
Okay.
last show, created the project and ran the init command. And what that does is that gives us all of the file structure that we see here. Now, the way we
Okay.
did it inside of a folder that was not empty. So it said, hey, you've got some files in here. Do you still want us to build the structure around it? And that's what we did. So that's why our source files ended up remaining inside of there. Instead of, what also can happen here is you might be able to see from the suggested text coming that I could point to a template as part of that init command and bring that down, and it would use that code and the definitions that exist around Azure DevOps, GitHub, Azure Dev Container to put that information inside of those folders if I was to bring down that template, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's pretty cool that what you're saying actually matches exactly what the documentation says, is that your starting point to make a one of these templates is either just brand new, like you did, just take an empty directory, azd init, and then put your project into it, or the other way around. The terminology they use in the docs is convert a sample, but that means you've got existing code, and that is what you showed us last time, and it sort of works around it, which I think is really cool. So azd init, and it creates this file structure that you were already going over, and the file structure now is partially what we're going to fill to make this whole thing go. So that's cool.
Exactly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back into our Blazor app.
I'm going to get the link to that page. It's called Make Your Project Compatible with Azure Developer CLI, not just into the chat, but if you are watching live, it is already in the show notes on YouTube. Yeah. Now, sometimes what I found, though, is YouTube is a little clever, and they will cache very aggressively, which makes sense. So you might sit there and hit F5 and be like, well, I don't see the show notes. But they've cached the website I think they're pretty aggressive about it. And sometimes I've had to even like hit Control F5 or maybe just wait a little bit. So.
Yeah. And this is the document that Chris is talking about. And it really does walk through not only the structure and some of the things that we pointed out here around, what gets created from the architecture side when you instantiate that new project or you init an AZD environment. But once you get here, okay, starting from, hey, I want to create a new template, these are the steps and things that we need to go to. So this is kind of our show guide for the next, because we won't get it done all day today, but for the next couple of days, this is kind of what we're following along to.
Right. Even though I showed the chat, I understand that on-screen version of the URL is completely worthless to everybody watching. So either head to the Twitch chat or the YouTube comments.
There you go.
To get the real link there.
It looks nice when you put it on screen, but that's not.
Yeah, like everybody, hurry, type it really fast. No mistakes. Come on, it's a typing quiz. All right.
Cool. So I'm gonna, since we're doing infrastructure as code, and we're kind of working on bicep files and things like that, I like to work in VS Code for those kind of activities. Personal preference, everything we're seeing here, if you wanted to open up in the full-on Visual Studio, you could certainly do that.
Yeah. Doesn't matter. It sounds like your favorite editor. And the cool thing about it is that this isn't just limited to .NET. Like we happen to be doing an ASP.NET project. But even when you look in the documents, in the documentation that I just showed, in order to show you how to do one of these with an existing project, they pull down a Python Flask app. So bring your favorite IDE. It doesn't matter. Bring your favorite editor.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
This is cool.
So, and I was thinking about going insiders. We'll stick with code because this way, then, if you've downloaded the latest version of Visual Studio Code, then you've got everything we're doing here. And anything we might show, because I do have access to GitHub Copilot, maybe we wind up, using some of that as part of what we're doing here. But that is something that's available either because you've got an individual subscription to that or you've got a business subscription to that. So there's ways to get that too. Okay, let's get rid of the welcome banner. I think where we want to start is we want to basically, let's take a look at the Azure. We don't want to bring this up in a container because we're not running anything. That's fine. And I don't think we defined a container. That's on the, no, it really didn't. It gave us Python, yeah, which isn't what our project is. So it kind of gave us a generic sample of what it thought it might be. Okay. Something we will have to do.
Yeah, we'll have to go get a. There's two ways about it, right? Is if I recall correctly, the default code spaces container will cover us, but we probably don't want that. We probably want to get a container ready to build .NET, which we can get that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that could be one of the shows in and of itself. So, so we talked about the Azure environment. We may come back to this when we start putting in environment variables for the infrastructure part. But for right now, we'll leave that alone and let's go into our main bicep. Now, this main bicep file, and I'm just going to bring the files out of the way so we can see this here. This came down from the starter template, right? So the starter AZD init, you still have to pick some kind of a starter structure to come up with. And I chose the starter bicep one, which said, okay, I'm going to give you bicep files. There's also a starter Terraform, which would have given me the Terraform files or the TF files that would go ahead and give me the structure to create Azure. But in this case, we're going to walk through the biceps folder or bicep structure of this file a little bit and modify it for what's going to be our purposes. So let's take a look and see what it gives us, right? Important thing here at the top is this first line around target and subscription. Typically, when you target a bicep file, it is targeted to a specific resource group. This is by targeting to a subscription, it's going to then have the understanding and the need that it needs to create some kind of a resource group inside of our Azure subscription. So just by setting this at the beginning, changing the scope a little bit. If we didn't have this here, the default scope is just to the group level, but because we're saying subscription, now I've got to make sure that we've got information in here around a resource group. So just something you may see that, different, walking through this bicep file, this is kind of what they've given us. And Chris, feel free to, I'm not able to see the chat, but if there's questions or if you've got questions, I'm totally on board with going at the pace or the direction we need to.
Yeah, no problem. But yeah, right now so bicep, for folks who don't know, is a domain-specific language for describing. I'm winging this definition, describing assets that you're deploying to the cloud. So if I recall correctly, am I right about this, that the AZD initialization stuff supports bicep or Terraform?
Yes.
And we're just using bicep today. So
yeah, and bicep is Azure specific because ultimately it compiles or it gets translated into the ARM template. So basically the structure of what it is that Azure, Azure APIs need to go ahead and then create in your subscription. So creating this it's specifically designed to deploy things into Azure. It also, and yeah, we actually, I think we did a show in the past on bicep, as well as, there were some conversations around related to Terraform in there too. So the idea is that you can bring whichever one you're working on. I know when I talk to customers, it's, bring the, if you've invested time and energy into building Terraform scripts and understanding how Terraform works, go for it. There's some cool features in Terraform that let you understand, well, what's been created in my environment, and as I go to deploy something new, understanding what's changed when I go to make that deployment. So there's some cool things that the Terraform world certainly gives you, and there are a lot of good features there too. So what we're defining here in this structure is essentially we're going to define some parameters. So information that we have to pass into the bicep file when we run this. So if I was to just run this via a command line and do, a PowerShell script, which is how we could deploy it, or an AZ command to deploy it, I would have to provide these variables in there from the parameter. So I need an environment name, and that it gives us what that definition is here. So basically, name of the environment. So we get something that makes all of the resources that we put into here unique across what would be, potentially global instances. So if we think about, the Azure websites, that's a global URL that gets created. We want to make sure that what we drop there is unique. And there are other resources like storage accounts and things that might fall into that bucket. So in case we deploy any of those, we've got an environment name there, a location string, because everything has to reside in some location, and we can certainly pass that in. And then the other one we have to pass in is the actual name of the resource group. Once we have all of those, then that's the only thing that we need to provide when we call this bicep script. And let's see what it's going to go ahead and run for us. There's an abbreviations.json file. Maybe we should take a look at that and see what that is. So inside of here is essentially...
Oh, yeah, look at this. Okay. It's the thing that a lot of you are probably doing at work anyway.
Yep.
Prefixing all your resources with an abbreviation, except now you can standardize on it.
Yes. Yeah. So this was given to us when we created our project, our AZD project. So we now have the ability to reference all of these abbreviations. And if we go back to, can I do this? No. There we go. All right. We should be able to see one of two. It gets used somewhere. Let's see. So in this case, where it's because it's a resource group, it's using the .resource groups. Let's see how fancy we can get here. Can I go? Nope, no definition. So if I just go back to there's our resource groups. So it would essentially prepend that with the RG dash when it creates that that name for us. So either we get a resource name or it's going to go ahead and create one for us based on this convention. So that's what this is essentially asking here, is checking to see if it's empty. If it is not empty, if it's not empty, use the resource group name. If not, go ahead and create one. And then that is, because we kind of jumped down there pretty quick. Let's see. So we've got some tags. So anything that a tag is an item in Azure that essentially a key value pair, and you can put it on any resource you have that you're creating. So from the resource group all the way down to the individual items that you're creating. In this case, because of the way we're deploying this, we're actually saying everything that gets deployed through this is going to have this particular tag of AZD environment name and then the actual environment name that we provided in the parameter above. This unique token to be used in naming. Oh, so this is giving us that unique token based on the environment name, the subscription ID, and then giving us something.
Yeah, they're figuring out that hash. Well, I don't want to say it's a hash, but a unique string, because it does turn out some resources only have to be unique within a certain context, maybe your resource group or maybe your subscription, but some have to be globally unique.
Yes, exactly.
I want to say storage accounts are one of those.
Storage accounts, your websites are two that typically come to mind. Anything that's got a URL that gets used across the service.
Right. So they're doing us a favor here by saying, hey, and look, because this is code, if this particular method doesn't work for you, replace it. Right?
Yeah.
That's the thing that's great about it is here's a method, a good starter method, but if your organization has a method that you like to use or you do, then whatever you want.
Yeah, and that might mean adding some additional environment variables or adding, pointing to some other reference for where that data lives. Those are things that you can certainly pull in. Um, this down here, next line, disable next line, no. So basically, even though there's not an app service being created as we go through and look at this, it actually, although it's not being created, it is does have a value here that basically supplies an app service name for an app service that to be created later, essentially. Um, so we may reuse that. The difference being is that the parameter is something that can be passed into the bicep file, whereas the variable is something that gets set inside of that bicep file. And it might be based on things that were passed in, like environment name and location. Okay. Sound cool so far?
Yeah, yeah. This is interesting. It's it just makes you think about how much goes into trying to templatize this, and that's probably why we don't do it generally.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I've had a thought for a while that this is a great method perhaps, and I'm just I just like try to throw out spitball ideas for how we use tools, and one of them is that as an organization or as your team you could create like guidance, whether you want to call it architectural guidance or just project guidance that fits your organization, and that sure is better than reinventing it every time, because that's how you get the little differences and the little mistakes. So
Yeah.
yeah, this is neat.
Cool. Um, since we're looking at the bicep. Also included in the bicep area is the main parameters.json, and you see those values, the environment name, the location. They match a couple of the parameters that we had here on environment name and location. Um, it also has, we didn't talk about this, but in addition to the description, there's a min and max length, so you can include those or not include those, as we see from those here. But what we do see in this file, though, is the reference to Azure environment name and then the Azure location. So it's actually looking to pull those in from some location, and where might those exist. Um, so those can exist inside of our Blazor appdev.environment file, right? So if we were to say, as we run this template and we tell Azure AZD to do an AZD provision, which is the command that would then say, okay, go look at your infrastructure files and go create those resources in Azure. We could tell it to do that for the Blazor app dev environment, and it would use the environment variables that are essentially set up inside of here. So if we go back and, sorry, wrong one, parameters. Just to make sure we get the naming right. So here's our, well, we already have our environment name. That's cool. It's the location we need. And we can basically, it's giving me, I have Copilot up and running. It's giving me suggestions. We could just say East US, right, is a place where we're going to go ahead and, for this particular environment, store that. So when I run that command, provision won't ask me for that information. It will take this as the defaults when we go ahead and run that command, essentially. What's interesting is, and I'm pretty sure, so we have a parameter here of resource group name, but we don't have a parameter for that. So that means it would definitely, when we run it, it would prompt me to supply it. Although we could come into here and give, yeah, thank you so much. Give me a little bit of an assist here. I love Copilot.
It's I don't know all the various technologies that have been coming together on my machine, but I'm seeing help in my Windows terminal, in here in Visual Studio Code. I know more help is coming in
Mm-hmm.
terms of what was demonstrated at Build in terms of the chat, and it's actually become a little difficult for me to keep up with what's been released in which tool, because just one day they just sort of start working and they go, oh, that's cool. So yeah.
Not a bad thing. Yeah, it's nice when when things, like you said, things start to light up and like, oh wow, that's there now. So, um, cool. All right, everything good so far? No questions. We're kind of
No, we're just cruising along. So
yep.
these environment variables, like you said, there's something that you would define. Uh, you would define now. What I'm curious about, I guess, is as I was thinking about it, is these could not be defined anywhere and just be environment variables, right? And
Mm-hmm. Injected at runtime.
injected at runtime. Yeah. Okay.
I
Cool.
mean,
Awesome.
yeah, it depends who's calling it, right? If I'm calling it from
Sure.
command line,
Yep.
or if I'm calling it from a CI/CD pipeline, which is possible, right? Then you just inject them there. But what's cool is because we're setting them in the environment, one of the things that provisioning will ask is, well, okay, what environment are we provisioning? And because I've defined the Blazor app dev with these variables, that's what will get injected. If I was to go ahead and, have it via the command line create another environment, as we saw last time, I'll get another folder with that environment name with its own set of environment and configuration JSON files. All right. I think what we want to do is we've got the structure here to put a resource group together. What I think we want to do is it would be, let's just look at the rest of the file, make sure there's nothing else here. We get an output, right? So the output is the location and the tenant ID related to the essentially the subscription that we deployed this into. Okay. What we're going to do next, though, is we need to provide a well, let's do this. Let's see if I can get some help. Create an app service plan. Okay. So essentially what it's done is it's given me, and one of the cautions I always say when we do something like this is, all right, let's look through it and see what it gives us, because oftentimes, it's like any code you would pull from the web or from Stack Overflow or something like that. You want to make sure that it fits in with what you're doing. Now it is kind of smart in what it's pulling in. So it knows that, hey, there's some abbreviations where we may want to throw this and the environment name into the actual name of the app service plan, because we don't have that defined as any other variables here. So it's giving us a way to create that resource essentially. It's taking the location that we've already defined as one of our variables. It is bringing in, much like the record above it, it's bringing in our collection of tags variables. And then it's also throwing some thoughts around what the initial SKU would be. We get some options here. So let's see what we get with this. So in this case, they're changing around the name. Anything else? Oh, it just shortened that from app service plan to ASP. And if we do a third one, it gives a different way of naming it well. So the structure is the same. It's just, based on the name that we might want, but we can change that anyway. So just walking through some of the things that Copilot gave us, I'm going to go ahead and select that. That's interesting. Why? Subscription is not valid for this resource. Oh, because we also need group RG. Not RG though. It is. Oh, and that doesn't look like it satisfied it. Okay. Here's what it gave us. It gave us a app service plan for that you would typically put in place if you weren't doing, and I'll show what I mean by that. If we go back up to here and I just comment that out. There's app service plans. Interesting. So that abbreviation doesn't exist either. Okay. So these are some of the things that when you bring in some code. You got to see where, so resources, app service plans, and it probably is just, yeah, I don't see unless it's under web. Web server farms. That's typically, so that's on the bicep side. That's what we call it here. So that's what
Yeah.
we're looking for the resource. So
Right. Like the plan in bicep is called, yeah, that makes sense too.
cool.
I know those
So
terms can get really confusing. App service plan,
yeah.
you know, and I get it. I get it because I was confused by all of those terms for quite some time. Well, maybe not, I don't know. And then eventually I started to get some mental models of what they were, right? Like an app service plan. In some respects, I like to think of your specific whether you choose to use like basic or standard or whatever the different SKUs are, is you're just kind of you're kind of determining if I'm going to use IIS as the abstraction, is just how many websites can I load onto this one IIS server. Now that's not accurate at all because of course you have scale out. So now I have 2 of them, 3 of them, 4 of them, and I didn't have to think about that. And then it doesn't have to be IIS either, not if you deploy on Linux, right? So
yes.
But it is the abstraction I always went back to, having spent a career, on Windows servers and IIS, is just thinking like, hey, I can pack multiple websites on here. So yeah, here we go. So that's but it's interesting that the terminology shift just slightly. Kind of makes sense though, because I think, Bicep's probably trying to be slightly more generic in some respects. But anyways, here we go. So you're basically saying, here's how you create an app service plan, and there's the prefix you use. Go dig it out of the environment.
Yeah, exactly.
The definitions.
Yeah. Now you see when I uncommented the target scope line, it fixed this because it is used to deploying. It doesn't have to understand where the resource group is. This one is throwing an error now because, well, it's not, the scope is no longer subscription. It is a resource group. So creating a resource group in a resource group isn't possible. So I'm going to take this out, and it's like, well, all right, how do we tried when we were playing around, we kind of tried group, and that looked like it worked, but it really didn't. Let's see what there's another error. Subscription is not valid for this resource type. Permitted scopes. Let's do this instead of, we're not getting a ton of help from Copilot around this. Let's do, and this is where I would typically go at this point. They say, okay, let's look at the docs.
Right.
And inside of here, so this is the bicep and ARM template reference documentation. Inside of here, there's an overview that you can get to the bicep components. You can look at essentially a reference for all of because the bicep and the ARM template are very heavily linked. Anytime something gets added to the ARM template, it's automatically available through the bicep, on day one. You have essentially a section in here for each service that we have in Azure. So in this case, we know based on what we were looking at before that web was where some of our things were. And in this case, this is the web server farm. And let's see. Server farms resources can be deployed to resource groups. So resource group deployment commands, we might come back to that. But in general, this is the structure of our, that basically all the properties that we can add to a server farm inside of a bicep file. And then inside of here is further information about what can be placed inside of there. So one of the questions I had in looking at that file was the SKU description. So the SKU description has a number of properties in there. There's if we go back and look at, if we look here, we've got a name and we've got a tier. So what are our possible values in here? Because I probably don't want to leave it at basic. I'd want to, at least put a standard level in here. So what are my possibilities? So looking in our SKU description, there is name of the resource and the tier. It's interesting. I was actually expecting a little more definition inside of there. So let's see if I can get inside of here. So, Max, that doesn't matter. So it's just a string. All right. Think. So it should be something. I know this because there's free, there's basic,
Right.
there's
Yeah.
standard, there's
Standard.
premium.
Right.
I
No, I'm trying to look for them too while you're, because
yeah.
I'm surprised that it's yelling at you about S1, but it might be easier to go back to what it wasn't yelling at you about, because basic even allows, I mean, I appreciate that we're just messing around, but basic I think allows you to have 10.
Yeah, basic lets you. We would have to go through and look at the capacities on that. Let's see. Is that here? Oh, those are just not the real values. So we could say something like
And which file
Azure
is this again that we're updating? It's the
main bicep.
yeah, so okay. I'm just looking at a example here.
Try that one. See where that goes. App service plans overview. That's what we want. Okay. Yeah, this is more right. So
App service plans. So you have SKU and then name.
yeah.
So back in, because I'm looking at a sample one
Okay.
just to
You pulled up
compare.
one. Yeah.
I just pulled up a sample bicep file just to compare. Now, unfortunately, this sample also goes with B1. So they have SKU and then the property, but the only property in there was just name B1. That was it. There was nothing else. Now, granted, you may be able to do more than that, but they did not say S1 in standard in this particular example I'm looking at.
Okay. So it
I don't
may
know.
be that. Yeah, it may be that in the definition of
So
for
you've
the
got
definition.
params and SKU, then name, right? Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. Yeah, it may be that not all of those fields are required for a SKU, basically.
Yeah, so server farms, module app service plan, right? That's the one we're on,
Yeah.
which is interesting because there you see server farms, which is not exactly the same thing, I guess, but
Well, hang on. Yeah, I mean
okay,
Microsoft.web,
resource app service plan. Oh, interesting. Okay.
right?
Name group. So, yeah. Huh. That is different. It is different how how that is set up.
Yeah. I mean, you're comparing it to what you're seeing on yours, right?
What I did is remember the one we made a couple episodes ago where all we did was just to knit a React
Oh
app.
yeah, yeah.
So I just said, well, let me open that and see what they did.
Okay.
And it's a little different. It's a little different. They say create an app service plan to group applications under the same payment plan and SKU. That's in the comment. And it says module app service plan. And it's just defined slightly differently.
Okay. I'm I'm sure there are many different ways that we can
Yeah.
certainly make this.
Right.
So two things I want to do. I think we're good on the SKU. I would like to be able to point to the documentation instead of just knowing that the name and the tier are what they
Yeah.
are.
No, I agree.
Um, what
See if I can find that.
the other thing I do want to find though, because I think this is important, is I want to make sure that we define the app service plan as being a Linux machine, so that we can make sure that that runs as well. Dun, dun.
Okay, so there's a kind Linux that we can use, and I agree with you that I'm trying to find the the reference for this, because it's one thing to keep finding samples that happen to do what you want,
Right.
which is great, but what you want is to say, okay, when that fails me,
Mhm.
where's the reference? And just haven't found it right now. So, but this
Yeah.
is what we do, right, as developers. So in any case,
Yeah. Let's take a quick look in case there's. Yeah, we're going to get to this one next. This is the actual app site that gets created inside of our app service. But
what page are you looking at right now? Just curious.
this one's the next one. This is sites.
Okay, I don't know if this is the reference we're looking for. I'm pasting it over in the Discord there.
Oh.
Oh, it's just 2 up from where you're at, server farms.
Yeah.
So as I was heading down here, I said, okay, in their sample there, they say that kind is listed, SKU is listed, and then you can start going down and seeing the property values.
Yes. And we have each of those sections essentially mapped out here, right? So this is the overall server farm with the high level structure, or that level 1 structure. And then as you drill into each one of these, then you get the next level down. So extended location and what that has, the app service plan and what that has. I know I saw a reference, and maybe it was just for certain pieces in the bicep, where this document actually gave you, when you got down to the lowest level, like in this case asking for a string, what are the possible string values that I could put in there?
Right.
And that's
It
what
did
I'm
that
not
for
seeing here.
it did that if you go up to SKU, it does link off to SKU description, which
is here.
still again, name of the resource SKU, not what you want, right? You want to know the actual one. So I wonder, is that really heading off to, is it bicep documentation or ARM documentation that you would reference?
I would say
yeah,
bicep documentation, to be honest.
right. I agree. I just,
Let's see if this makes a difference. No, it's kind of the same thing. Okay. You'll see if we go back up to the top here, and you'll see that we've got, when we define the bicep resource, it's like, well, what are you looking for? Well, we want a web server, or an app service, as we call on the portal. We also have this section here, which is a version number. So these definitions get modified over time as new features get rolled into it, or as things happen. So to make sure that that things stay backward compatible, include the version number. So if you're
Right.
wanting to know, well, I've got a reference that points all the way back to
Yep.
2020.
Yep.
Well, that was what was available back then in the bicep files. So
Right.
just for completeness, to make sure you're kind of aware of why these change and how you can make sure your reference stays the same.
Yeah, new features get added, new options get added. So an API version comes out, and you can even in the documentation, which you've done, you've selected a specific version. And so that you're looking at some definition, because this is what happens to us. You get all this working, and then you
Mm-hmm.
don't touch it maybe for months, maybe for years. And then you got to come back and look at how it works. And the latest documentation isn't going to help you as much as going right to what you're working on.
Yep. Totally spot on. So let's go back here. We know we want to include kind. But we also want to, we got to get rid of the fact that this is scoped for a resource group. So there was a link that I opened. Yeah. Subscription deployments of bicep files. Creating new, nope. Managing your subscription, monitoring, setting the scope, which we did. It's created. Oh, I think that's what we need. Well, that isn't a module. Let's see if that. Let's try this.
Yeah. So the bicep file that you generated
Yeah.
used the resource keyword, not module, for app service plan.
Use the.
So on
bicep.
line 52, it said resource app service plan, huh?
Yes.
Huh. That's just so interesting, because I believe that's probably true.
It's I mean, we created
think,
that, right? We added that when we added the comment and accepted the code.
Yeah. Okay. It's just funny that a lot of these samples use module and resource, and I have to admit I don't know the difference at this point.
So between modules and what? And resources?
Yeah, some of the samples use a module keyword to create the app service plan, and then other samples use resource, and I'm not sure that I know the difference, except that I'm not sure that I know the difference other than you've created a resource group up above.
Yep.
And now you're trying to create a resource. Okay. Yeah, I got it. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So even the resource group that we created up above is still a resource.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Right.
So resources, we could take a bicep file and we could define the resources that we're creating. Seems a little redundant to say it, but basically that's the general idea, is that inside of this bicep file, we're creating a number of resources, and we're defining that inside of this file. It doesn't live anywhere else. You can create a module that is essentially a snippet of bicep code where you can expose certain parameters like we saw above for the things that people can change about your module, while locking down certain things that you don't want them to change. Okay. So think of, we have a standard way of deploying an app service or a standard way of deploying our storage accounts, and we don't let a private or a public endpoint happen on our storage accounts, which is a common use case for many customers. So because of that, we'll lock down, or you can create a module essentially that can lock down and automatically create, turn your public endpoint into a private endpoint, and the only thing you can basically pass in is the location and the unique name of your storage account. That's all you can do. And by calling that module, I've got a consistent way of every time across my organization we create a storage account, I know that that's going to be done the right way. That
Yeah.
it's almost like code reuse, right?
Yeah,
We're
right.
defining an
Modules are
object.
reusable, but
Yes.
resources are kind of like constants in a way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll be honest, this one is throwing me because I know there is a way to, and I really thought the group was going to take care of it, but essentially we're saying it's okay that the target scope is subscription. You just need to know that this app service plan is going to reside inside of this particular resource group. And that's not what it's letting me do. Let's go back, and because I don't see anything else in here either. Either at the kind, because you figure it's got to be at a higher level, right? So name, location, tags. Well, let's do this. Maybe we can change the create app service plan. For a target scope of subscription. Right, so we're so it can kind of see a difference, I guess. Let's try that.
And what is it complaining about in the?
Yeah, so
telling us subscription is not valid for this resource type. Permitted scopes, resource group.
Yeah.
Okay.
There is something. There's 9 times out of 10, I create a bicep file and resources that are inside of a, as you would expect, inside of a resource group scope. But what I need to do is get the definition for, let's see this, just basically how to Azure Bicep define resource Right, this is the one that we were looking at. Okay, let's try this one. Well, it's the same thing, but at the tenant level, so it doesn't matter. Okay, artist types how to set a scope with bicep and deploy the description.
So in your Visual Studio, in your bicep file, you're concatenating the abbreviation for web server farms and I don't know what it's concatenating it with.
Where are you? This one. So web server farms with the environment
with
name.
environment name.
Mhm.
And then it's complaining that
It's
it's
really
saying
complaining about the scope.
subscription is not okay.
It's not, so the scope subscription is not valid for this.
What about
So,
yeah, I see what you're saying.
and maybe I'm putting it in
If
the
you do
wrong place.
scope RG, that doesn't help you, right?
No, because it really wants. I mean, for what I've seen from this parameter, really wants the.
You
So
were
it's
saying
better.
if the scope was subscription and then but you were going to try something else.
Oh, okay. Hang on. Permissible properties include if this property is no, like that less. So it made it better, but it didn't completely answer the question. So scope, it's not allowed in server farms. So it has to be a property. So scope has to be included somewhere else, if that makes sense. Because um, when we go back to here and we look at the list of properties, scope's not one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So we need something in here that lets us define the scope. And there were two things it mentioned. It mentioned depend on, and it mentioned extend location. So let's take a look. Name of the extended location. Hey, Chris, you said you were looking at one that we did earlier, right?
Yes.
Can we pull that up and see, make sure if that's a target scope and see, because that,
Well,
if it
we
had an app
can,
service in it.
but they did things a little bit different, but that's okay. We can look at
Yeah,
it.
let's take a look.
So let me
If you're okay to share.
yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Let's share screen. Interesting. It's fighting me. Why is it fighting me? Okay, there we go. And now I just have to I don't yeah, it did switch to it. Okay, so we have switched to mine. Okay.
Cool.
So they did things a little different. You're gonna see. So first of all, yeah, went a little too far. Target scope equals subscription. Is that what you did as well?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that comes over by default.
Okay, and then they have organized the resources in a resource group. So they used resource RG and generated a resource group name partially from the environment that was given, and then I guess using the abbreviation from this file here. In fact, there it is right there.
Yeah. All right. The next line, I see what they did. So that's cool. So that's the same thing we have with that resource group. The next thing is that they have the application front end, and that file lives in app web bicep. So if you're to go into the folder structure up 3 up from where you are now with the main, yeah, because it's the infrastructure bit. So app web bicep, and what web bicep is, see here is web bicep is a module. And inside of that module, they've created the parameters, and they've got essentially the definition of what gets created, and then what the outputs from that is.
Right.
Which is cool.
Right. You were starting with the
main bicep
with let's see. I'm sorry. Did I already pass it? So okay, so the next thing they did was they declared the web app, they
Mm-hmm.
declared the web app settings, fine, the API and its settings. But if I go further down, here we go. Create an app service plan, which again, and like you said, um, another place to go look. Core host app service plan bicep. And then
Yep.
so they basically, if I understand this correctly, they are calling this bicep file with these parameters to go fill in.
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
so we might be better served by going and looking here
Yep.
where they say, okay, name, location, tags, SKU, kind, properties, and that was filled in. And now properties, we can go back and look at what was done here, I suppose. Although they didn't really do anything more but say reserved is true, which just means that it's not a spot instance, or maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know if there's spot for app service plan. There just must be different ways that you can do this. So yeah, they didn't even bother with scope, right?
Yeah, and although if you go back to the main file, scope is a parameter that is included.
Okay.
There's scope RG, which is the
right.
So it's there, but there's nothing that gets done with it over on the module side or in the actual.
It's like they passed it, but they didn't use it.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
Oh, hold on a second. No, that's still location. That's still like a US East type thing, right? Unless it's, I mean, maybe.
So they're basically using wherever the location, wherever the resource group was created, that's the location we're going to use. Yeah. So we don't have to keep passing that parameter around because we've already essentially set it once.
Right.
But because the module has the scope, and maybe that's the problem, because if we're going to put the target scope as subscription, then we might have to create that as a module so that we can pass that scope in.
But oddly enough, I don't even feel like it's being used. Like, maybe I'm wrong, but if I go back to app service plan bicep, I don't see scope used anywhere.
Totally agree.
It's like they passed it, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can pass variables into things that it doesn't care about.
Yeah. And I'm guessing, though, if you take that variable out, you'll get a bunch of more red squiggles. All right. I was wrong on that one. Interesting.
It's almost like, I know this sounds weird, but it's almost like app service plan doesn't I'm trying to think of why it wouldn't need a scope value. And there could be a very good reason for it. I mean, app service plans belong in resource groups, right?
They do. And the way it looks like, yeah. I mean, the way it looks.
We can look at this for our sample, because this is the bicep you're trying to essentially copy. So
yeah, but it's not rolling. I mean, it's not going the way I would have thought. And it looks, I mean, just looking at some of the other documentation, and there must be something that, because I'm skimming through it trying to just get to an answer as opposed to reading everything.
Right.
It looks like we need to keep things as a module because our deployment scope is subscription.
Okay. So does that mean you're going to want to make a file just like this?
Yeah.
And then fill it in?
Yep. So what we're doing inside of
here, do you want me to switch back to you and we'll
let's
figure out how to do this here? Okay, there you go. And then what we can do here
And yes, I know it's not happy. It's going to freak out. Let's do inside of the infra. Let's do a new folder. Let's call it web, right? Because it's our app, because that's what they called it in theirs, right? And then inside of here, let's put a new file. We're going to call that app service dot bicep. And if I come back to the main bicep and I take this chunk of code,
Yeah, I'm trying to see if I can get this over to you here. Not sure that you'll need it, but our way through it, I suppose. Better way to format that. But I've also got it up here too, so we'll figure this out. Okay.
Yep. So I'm basically just giving those. Oh, cool.
The top, I didn't format that the way I wanted, but
That's what. And maybe we don't do that. We give it. So we just do this: a name, string. Then we can get rid of all this.
the thing about it is not that you would want to leave it this way, but I wonder if you could hard code in here and then, just to see it work. But in any case, let's see. We're almost there.
Right. And if we wanted to, so yeah, we probably do want to do that. So I want to go ahead and do an output. ID, which is the string, and that's going to be equal to the app service plan ID, and then also output name string app service name plan. Okay. So what happens then is, and we're going to need to do this, creating that app service plan. Once that's done, we need to go back and create an app service on that app service plan.
So that's why you need the variables. Yeah.
Yep. So that gives us the ability to go ahead and pass them back. Now, we don't need the environment string, so that's fine. We'll get rid of that. And we'll save this as the app service bicep. So now let's go back to main. And instead of doing this as a app service.
Yep. And then now you give it a path to that location.
Yeah. Right. In quotes or in single quotes?
In single quotes. I don't know if double quotes matter.
Is it smart enough to, hey, looks like it's smart enough to give me that. Doesn't want all of this. Does need a name. Well, it's funny. There we can get back to, if I paste that back in, sorry.
What are they complaining about there?
Lots of things, but
okay.
not too unexpected. Is that so we need location. I think it's just a matter of what it is I'm passing in, which I don't need to pass in any of those. And I think what I'm missing is,
so there's a params.
Yes.
So I'm going to send over what this looks like here.
Okay.
Probably easier than me trying to say it to you. So they pass name and scope as variables, and then params like as an object. And I don't know if that's necessarily required, but
Okay.
maybe.
The name's good. Interesting.
This is just how they set it up. It might be interesting to play with this a little bit and set it up the way you want, but
Yeah.
this is how they did it. I don't know that name in their version is exactly the same because I suppose for this I'd have to go over to the bicep file. Oh, I see. I see.
So I need a name for, I guess, how I'm referencing the module, and then a name for what we're going to actually pass in as a parameter here that winds up being the name of my service. So I think just to be sure, let's do this. Let's not have that get created from that. Let's just make it different and say this name is going to be right, something like that, so that it's unique, and then we can see if how we wind up using it going
So
forward.
I'm thinking that that's just the module name. Yeah, right. Right. That's just the name
Like,
of the module. That's not
like an
actually being.
instantiation of it.
Yeah. And then scope is scope must be saying the scope of the module. And then the parameters are what's actually going to get referenced in the module, which in this case are name, location tags, kind, reserved, and skew are the ones that they pull out in the module. So they
Yep.
pull out a name, you've got location, you've got tags, and then they still want kind, which I think you can set as Linux.
Which I didn't give them the choice, right?
Oh, I see. Yeah, yeah. Right. Yeah, you've already pulled those out. Yes. Okay. Gotcha. Yep. All right. Now.
So yeah, so I'm saying yes, you can give me anything on this, but this I'm going to define for you. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
I'm also going to take that and make that 2022 03 01. So we've got a more recent reference to that. All right. Cool. I know we are getting close to the top of the hour. I did not think this was going to take that long.
Well, we got stuck on
the scope through me.
Yeah, it's interesting how if you just do plain old azd init, they organize the file differently from if we call it from a template. And that's okay. I think azd init was trying to hold it to one file, essentially, right?
Yep.
Just to get you going.
Yeah, definitely.
But now that this makes me think a lot about, the best practice here and why you'll be happier later if you maybe shift to modules. I don't know the answer to that. That's like our friend Brian Manisi.
Exactly.
Might have some input there.
Yeah. I mean, I do think from a, not just us putting an app together, but from an organization, once an organization starts to get some size behind it, you want a common way of deploying your app service, probably a common way of deploying your certain bits in Azure, right? So let's create the module and have those modules, because you can centrally host them. You can either make them available from a certain repository, or you can put them into an Azure container registry and reference them out of there. So there are these common locations where we can say, well, this is where all of our modules get stored, and I just need to basically get a reference to that location when I build my bicep file.
Okay, so what else do we think we still need? We have an app service plan, so we still need an app server.
Well, that is the apps. We need app
Those are the
service.
apps, the app
Yeah.
services. Yes, right. So in this case, this would be a little bit of bicep that that just declares the web app, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Okay.
So, but we would have to. I mean, same thing. We'd have to do it inside of a module.
Okay.
So if this is our app, we could go ahead and say, well, I want another. Um, this is our app. .bicep, and we're going to need parameters on this for name, which is a string. We're going to need a param for location, also a string.
Yep.
We could do the fancy thing that the other guys did, which is
Params and
this is
pass them
group.
in, or no? I mean,
Oh,
yeah. That's interesting that they.
right.
So
So
they're
we've got all
basically
those.
saying, look at the
Go ahead.
resource group you're going to be deployed in and just grab its location, is what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Which is nice because then you avoid the mistake that I've made several times in the portal or even on command line where I define the resource group like I'm doing great. I define it for the app service plan. I define the location on the resource group. I define it in the app service plan. I define it on a web app, and then I go to do the storage account, and for whatever reason, I forget to define it, and so I get the default, and now it's the one that's different.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
all the rest of them are like in central US or something, and then this one's in east, and it just I don't know how I should feel about it. I mean, I suppose there are locality issues in a real production app. I suppose that's real, and then I even think there are SLAs based on locality, or maybe even they things about like, oh, it's there. Anyways, the point is it just even if you don't worry about that stuff, it just starts to drive you a little nuts. Like, I've got
Right.
this one
Yeah.
thing in a different region.
Why is it there?
I think technically speaking, though, it can be significant. Although I'm not saying I'm 100% certain about this, but if you had a storage account maybe across the country from the rest of your app, I feel like you would be looking at network ingress and egress for all of that.
Exactly. Oh
Okay.
yeah.
So it's not just OCD.
No.
It's yeah, go define it. For most applications, you're going to want that locality. I would say that's true for many, many applications.
Mhm.
And then I suppose, for other things that are other times it might make sense to say, no, I want my storage, whatever. But yeah, so it's not just oh, I don't like the fact that it's in a different location. It's that, no, you're going to now pay every time you hit that storage account. There's network charges. Whereas I'm pretty sure if they're in the same region, you I don't know if you don't pay it or I forget.
If moving data between regions can lead, depending on what services, can lead to some kind of an external or a cost when you move that data out. Plus, having services not in the same region where you expect them to be, they may not be able to see or access other services as well. So there's that
Right.
aspect of it. You've got limitations there. So yeah, and that's why this is kind of important, because we define it once.
Yeah.
And it
Right.
doesn't matter if somebody comes along and tries to reset it. I mean, we could, even do something like this, I think. And we make this so there's no. It's going to let me do it. Here's a parameter here.
They're just telling you, hey, maybe you should do this, which is funny because you're not even, so it is being passed in, frankly. It's just there's a default value in case someone doesn't pass it in.
Right, but I could do this.
Yeah. Which
right,
I think is
and
kind
get
of
around
funny.
it.
And they're like,
Although now
okay,
it's
well, now it's probably going to complain like, I don't know, maybe you should pass that in. I love it. I love how it's like,
it's trying.
and then you do pass it in and provide a default value, and they're like, okay, fine, at least somebody can pass it in.
Yeah.
So
So here's what I'm going to suggest. We've got a couple minutes. If you're okay, what I'd like to do is go back here. Let's bring this back up. What I want to do is do AZD login. I'm sorry, off login. I'm logged into Azure. Okay, so actually,
is that a
login.
login you do with AZ login?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
specific to that. So let me do this. I'm going to log out, and then I'm going to log back in, because in my Azure subscription, I don't by default have the ability to create a resource group with my account. I have to elevate my permissions when I want to go ahead and do something like that.
Okay.
Because I run with lower permissions just to kind of look at and see
Yeah.
the environment. So when you do that, though, AZD, certain services will require you to, it'll just run. Some services require you to log out and log back in to get the latest, or the latest scope inside of your token, and that's what we're doing
Right.
here.
Right.
So I'm going to do
Do you
this.
have that Azure, the AZ module in your PoshGit? Sorry, PoshGit in your Oh My Posh?
I
That's like one of my
don't.
favorites. Yeah. It's one of the first ones I set up because then I can see what subscription I'm logged into, which is not the same thing as what user I'm logged into on the subscription, which is what
Yeah.
it sounds like you're doing. And that's an interesting idea. Is that something that came from work or your
It's
idea to say like I have a view user? Is that what it is? You have a view user and then an elevated user?
so it's the same user
Okay.
um, inside of Azure.
Yeah.
There's a service called Azure Privileged Identity Management, or PIM.
Okay. Yeah.
And if you own, and this is what I did with the account that owns the subscription and owns my tenant, I said, these are the roles that I am allowed to elevate to. And or these are the roles that I want accounts to be able to elevate to. And then I added my account into that group so that I could elevate.
Right.
So the owner of the subscription and tenant, or the global admin, comes along and says, these are the roles that we can let people elevate to. And by the way, these are the people that are allowed to do this elevation. So it's two-step: define
Mm-hmm.
what roles and define who can do it. And then for me, I go into PIM and I say, well, what roles can I elevate to? And I have one that is my subscription owner, and I elevate to that. I get a notification. I say, yep, that's fine. Go do it. And then now I'm able to do elevated tasks inside of my subscription.
Okay. And I mean, this is really interesting, actually. I didn't know this
Yeah.
was a feature.
Mhm.
So is it just the fact that you logged out and logged in that elevated, or off screen you
Off
elevated?
screen.
Okay. I gotcha.
Yeah. Off screen, I
So
did it, but the
yeah.
sign out, sign in brought down my
Yeah,
my
sure.
authorization token that included
Right.
those abilities.
Yeah, the token that you had was not elevated. Now you are. So
Yep.
it's a little bit kind of like a oh man, I can't even remember the term for that now. When your screen goes black. uh but it's the elevation inside Windows. And that, man, I used to know that term by heart. And now for some reason it's escaping me. But
Yeah, the little thing that
let me
pops up
ask,
every you try and
yeah,
install something.
let me ask this question.
Okay.
Oh, the UAC stuff. Look at it,
There
came
you
back
go.
just in
That's it.
time. I would have Alex Trebek would have already buzzed me though and said, sorry, the correct answer was what is user account control. So here's an interesting one though.
Yeah.
Can that elevation be time limited such that
Yes.
you don't have to remember to go back and flip the switch off?
Yeah. But
That's cool.
it is pretty cool. And
Yeah.
usually there's a default, I think, there's a default number of hours, but there's a slider. So you can slide that left and right, to have,
Sure.
we're doing this one
15,
thing. It's probably taking me
whatever.
30 minutes to do, right?
Yeah.
Let's not make it any longer than it needs to be.
And this is something like I could set up on my Azure subscription,
Yeah.
because this sounds like something we should tackle. People get frustrated with things like UAC. I get it, especially when you're a developer and you're all day long, all day long, all day long. You
Yep.
want to be elevated. You want to be elevated. I feel like our applications are way better than they were even, gosh, whenever UAC came out 15, 20 years ago. I can't believe how long it's been.
It's been that long.
Um,
Yeah.
where like by rote we would just run everything as admin, and over the years I have backed off on that a lot,
Mhm.
although I still tend to run my Windows terminal as admin pretty much by rote. I don't have to, but it's become a reflex action. Maybe not the best thing for me to do, but having that that safety switch, it's the thing that you hate it until the one time that it saves you.
Yeah.
And then you're like, man, it really should be like a fighter jet in Top Gun, where I have to flip open the safety before I hit the button.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was interesting, not only that you just shared that you can do that, but then furthermore to say, well, now could I go into that tool and say, look, I need it for 15 minutes so I can actually do this deployment, and then shut off for me, so that if I'm just goofing around in the terminal and I do the thing I always do, which is like up, 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 up to go to a previous command, but I goof and I go one too far and it's going to redeploy again. It's like, nope. That kind of stuff, the one time that it saves you is the time that you go like, okay, I'm going to leave that safety on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyways, AZD provision.
Yeah. I will say that the reason I went down this path is because I had a friend of mine who ran as elevated permissions on a subscription. They had like a test subscription, and it got hacked.
Okay.
And
yep.
because it was owner, they had access to do everything. So they turned off a lot of the safety features that were in there related to things like Azure billing, right? And having, if your bill goes over a certain amount, you get pinged, right? Those all got turned off, when they went through and started, deploying what it was that they were working on. So by default, it's a good safety practice. And yes, it's a few seconds, but in the grand scheme of things, it's trivial to jump into that.
Right. So here's something I have totally forgotten how to do.
Yeah.
I have forgotten how to raid on Twitch. I don't know if we're gonna figure this out in the next few seconds here, but wait, hold on. I see a button here I can click, and I just pick a channel to raid. Okay. That's cool, because we can do that as we head out on Twitch.
Yep.
But you were going to finish off with AZD provision, which is fine.
Yep. The only thing I'm going to do is let's do this AZD provision, and I'm going to say environment. Right, because that's what we're calling our. Where do we? Boom. Right, that's our. Somewhere in here is our environment, and it's called Blazor App Dev, right? So this way it knows what to provision. So I do this. It's provisioning Azure resources. This can take time. Yep, do that subscription. That's fine.
Okay. All right. So there is a point to all of this, is where we're getting it set up. So with an AZD provision, or if somebody just grabs a template and says deploy, they can get the whole sample app. Now, it turns out that so far all we've really kind of gotten going was the app service plan, and then maybe the web app, or maybe not.
We didn't do the web app, but we at least wanted to say, hey, could we get the app service plan? Did we get all that configuration right to get to that? And we did, right? So application was provisioned. We could view the resources by going here.
Oh, that's cool that they even dropped the link in for you. Is that a clickable link in terminal, I wonder?
It looks like it. It highlights.
So a lot of times, interesting. If you hit control on it, it might pop it open. I don't know. Oh, and look at that. I mean, it's really, really small.
No, sorry.
But yeah, there it is. There it is.
So there's our app service plan inside of this app or this resource group that got created.
Right.
Long way to get there, but at
Yeah.
least we saw the pieces. We know if we're doing it at subscription level, it's got to be modules, and now we know.
Yeah. So what we're thinking now is we should be live tomorrow morning,
Mm-hmm.
and we can finish off the different resources, try to get the starter Blazor app up there,
Yep.
and so again, you would be able to use this template, provision it, and then if you finish the template off, the great thing about it is like they even encourage you, hey, fill out the dev container section, and so it just works with code spaces. Those other sections too. I don't know. I know the documentation says what they're all for,
Mm-hmm.
but it would be interesting to have them all finished off, and
Yeah.
then like you said, submit it to Awesome AZD, which would be really neat. So
Yeah, which is
okay,
something I want to do because we need a Blazor app up there.
yeah. I also think the other thing that it gets us is the different ways that you could use Blazor too. I think would be really valuable. Like it's not just that you picked Blazor WebAssembly, you deployed it with static web apps.
Yeah, which is
And
another
then
option.
yeah, and it's not just that you picked Blazor server. I don't know. It has a backend in Azure SQL. Those kinds of things are valuable. And then just to see how to set them all up in Azure is very interesting. So, all right, we had a couple bumps, but that's how it goes. That's how it goes.
That's what happens when you live code.
That's why it's live. Yeah. So, anyways, whether I think what we're going to do then is I think we are going to raid our good friend C Sharp Fritz, who is starting up, and his stream just started up. And so if you're here on Twitch, stay tuned for that. If you watched us on YouTube, thank you so much for joining us today. And there will be a part 2 of this where we continue working on the Azure Developer CLI template with an end goal of adding this to the awesome AZD site. But at the same time, getting to work through the issues that you'll see that developers work through every day when they're working with stuff either for the first time, or heck, it doesn't even have to be the first time. It could be the 10,000th time, and it's still something you got to work through. So, Rich, thank you so much for leading us through this and just getting us started on this. I think it's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
All right, so let's see if I can do this right. Everybody on Twitch should see us head over, and other than that, we'll see you next time on the Dev Talk Show.
Did that go?
I think so, but now I have to end the broadcast. So,
oops, sorry.